Dr. K.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome back. The last time we were talking about orgonite and yeah, piezoelectricity and all that kind of stuff. So we were just talking about the moon. It's the 18th today. So we're going to talk a
Mhm.
little bit about what's going on astrologically, and then we're going to talk about sovereignty and citizenship.
Okay, that sounds good. One thing I can say that right now we are in an Earth trine, and so that's three. The three Earth signs are being heavily affected, and this is actually the last Earth trine that we're going to experience. And I can't remember what planets they are, but I believe it's Mars and Pluto and potentially Uranus. I'm not sure,
Okay.
because my brain is out there right now.
It's
There's so
okay.
much
We
in
want the
there. Yeah.
concepts. The
The
concepts speak
concept.
to me more than the specifics anyway. So,
So anyway, there are three major planets that are affecting the three Earth signs, and so if you think what is Earth, the energy of Earth is all about really taking action on the material plane here in the world. And so this is a really powerful time for manifestation. And that was why when you and I had talked before, and I said, hey, I want to do the law of attraction. I want to do a hypnosis NLP workshop with people
yeah.
to activate, what are the desires that we want to create. And so I chose this week knowing that the cosmic energies are so powerful. And so
Yeah.
right now that's the time that we're in, and so it's very helpful.
Right.
Now when we relate the whole thing to sovereignty, and so you and I just started talking about that, and it actually, you had asked me the question about, well, what do you mean? I'm talking there's so many different levels of sovereignty, and it comes down for me that when you take action to step into your own physical sovereignty on earth here, that has repercussions through all the entire layers of the biofield essentially. And
Yeah.
so in 2021 I discovered Anna von Reitz. This was in September. September is always the most impactful month for me. It's really powerful.
Yeah.
And it's really the seventh month. As we all know, the calendar has been messed with, and the original calendar, September was the seventh month.
Wait,
Um,
is that because they had originally 7 planets? Are those connected?
I'm
Very
not sure.
beginner question, but you're
I,
not
I'm
sure.
actually I'm not sure because I haven't done a really deep dive into the
Okay.
calendar. But at some point, I'm sure that I will, because eventually I do. I have I now have the bandwidth and the interest to go digging into that particular thing. I'm just
Right.
not there yet. So I just kind of know the overall.
So
Um,
it used to be the seventh month
it used to be the seventh month, and sept to mean seven.
is seven.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just another sign. Right,
Okay.
exactly, exactly. So anyway, so I discovered Anna von Reitz. Now, Anna von Reitz has for about 40 years been digging into, what's wrong with America and the whole concept of, how did we get to where we are living essentially in a system that is so suppressive, that's all about rules, regulations, statutes, codes, and it's being wielded by authority figures who literally keep people in a state of fear. And if you think about it, everywhere we turn, our lives are guided by rules, regulations, and fear of not being compliant. I mean, fear of the IRS, fear of the cops, fear of child protective services, fear of the government, fear,
Fear of your
fear.
neighbors because they might call.
Exactly. Everything is, it's a huge culture of fear that we have
Yeah.
normalized. This is
Right.
not what America, this is not, and if you think about conceptually the energy behind how America was originally birthed, it
Mhm.
was all about being your own
Yeah.
person, your own human. And so being self-governing.
Yeah.
What we're looking at now is a corporate structure. And so I discovered Anna von Reitz. She's been talking about this for a long time. And there are many, many others, not just her, but there are many other people David Straight's another example who has been bringing this forward. He's quite well known, especially now. He's been talking about, so what actually happened was the citizenship that we, the people in America, have thought was really ours is actually not, because our citizenship has essentially been defrauded. And
And
so,
when did that happen? You said it wasn't meant that way, 1776.
right, it wasn't meant that way.
When did that, like in increments along the way, or was
Yes,
there
yes,
one?
yes.
Okay.
Well, what really, I mean, originally back in the day, if you think about it, the power of government was at a local level. It was your counties, it was your town, it was your people. Everyone lived in a community. You had the militia, who was really everybody, because we were all first responders supporting each other. If there was a fire and somebody's barn burned down, all the neighbors would show up to help.
Yeah.
Essentially, it was a way of self-governance, and then they would send their representatives, who were typically farmers, landowners. They would go down and they would meet in council for 6 months, whatever, and then they'd come back and do
Right.
their work. And so they knew that the governance was a civic responsibility. And
Right.
so as time passed, there have always been consciousnesses that don't want the people to be free. They have other ideas. They want to control us. They want to enslave us, because they want to essentially siphon our vital life force through our resources, through our labor, through our attention. And so there was always this, and there always has been. There
Yeah,
are
a low
always.
vibrational field, or
Exactly.
whatever you want to
Exactly.
call it,
Exactly.
however you
Exactly.
identify with that energy.
And really, if you think about who's behind it and who has been behind it, in at least in our lifetime and in our generations, it's a group of bankers. It's the people that control the financial systems of the world, essentially, and they're, where they come from, their people. And so
Can I just say, just for a minute, that I was, of course, thinking about this morning, and people were like, oh, the Knights Templars were the first bankers and whatever. Well, they didn't intend it to be like that. The Knights Templar said, listen, we will hold your money so that you don't get robbed on your way on this pilgrimage, and then you can just pick it up at the other bank. Right? We're
right.
having a very difficult time discerning, okay, in 1776 or the 1800s, this we might not want just our neighbors putting out the fire. That might not be the best thing. But now we're at the opposite end, and we're
Mhm.
throwing all of the good things in the past away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like banking makes sense, or fire department makes sense in a way, but here we are at such an extreme that we've got to consider other options, and going back.
Well, it all got hijacked, and
Yeah.
it's what happens whenever there's a good organic thing. There are always people that want to come in and seize control of that. And it's not the banking in and of itself, it's the usurious interest, and also the debt slavery system that's
Right.
been imposed. It's become so oppressive. I mean, it's
And the
actually,
banking is just one example
banking is
that
an
we can all
example, and
identify with.
yes. And so, the fractional reserve system, which is all about, it's really to keep people perpetually enslaved under mountains of debt. And if you think about it, there are very few people around that we know, and I challenge anybody to who lives a normal life, who's not a gazillionaire. I challenge anybody to find people, examples in their own lives, their circles, who are not burdened by debt,
Yeah.
because that is what we have
But we just
normalized.
don't talk about it.
Right. But
It's
this is
shameful.
I mean, that's part of the reason why people were stuck during the COVID. They could not, they felt that they had to bow down to the pressure to obey the tyrannical mandates, because people couldn't afford to not have that job, because they're saddled by a huge mortgage. They had to have a car payment. They can't live. And so it takes away your freedom, and it takes away your choice. And all of that was by design, to make people enslaved and to keep us enslaved. And so it's the, it's just that consciousness is
And if you
behind it.
want to use the word enslave, or I prefer the term beholden, like you are glued to your job. How many of us work, a part-time job even, and love going there and get the money that we need? It's
Right.
like we're at the crossroads where it's a choice. You're either going to work at a job that keeps you fed and relatively safe from the elements,
Hmm.
but not able to experience life fully.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Americans don't travel, they get their weekends off. Like, yeah, it's just
Right. And then they
multi-system
medicate
failure.
themselves. So they what do? They I
Yeah.
mean, how many people live for those 2 weeks a year where they're on vacation? I mean,
Yes.
how is that a life? You're
And
slaving away.
people are excited that they have 2 weeks
Yeah.
because a lot of people don't get a 2 week vacation.
Right. Right. But the point is,
Yeah,
life wasn't
you're
meant to
right.
be what life wasn't meant to, your vital life force wasn't meant to be given away, essentially being chained to a wheel. And that's how people live, and they think it's normal. And that is not normal. And so anyway,
And the
to go
better
back,
you are at being used to being chained to the wheel, the more successful you look.
right, exactly.
It
Exactly.
seems like it's so completely
Right.
backwards. So anyway, I keep interrupting you.
I'm sorry. Can we put this on hold for 1 second? Because my honey just got home.
What?
I know.
Yes,
Can we?
we're back.
All
What
right.
is sovereignty then?
Okay. So anyway, going back to the history of America,
Mhm.
originally a man and a woman was born, and we belonged to the jurisdiction of land and soil, which which is where natural law exists.
Mhm.
But in the corporate world and in the world of government as we know it now, everything is statutory. It is not, that is a different jurisdiction. And what ended up happening was slowly over the years, the interests that wanted to centralize everything and take away the power from the decentralized people on the land, on their counties, and kind of gather it all up and move it into this overarching power structure, which is what we currently have. If you
Yeah.
think of Washington, D.C., that's everything's federalized. And if you think back to your history, American history, even as sparse as we were taught, that was not how America was meant to be formed. And what we're looking at now is vastly different than what even what little we learned in school. Very, very different structure. So how did we get to that point?
What we
And how did we,
memorized in school.
right? And how do we get
Yeah.
to the point of where we don't have any freedom? Because really, when you're living under fear, you don't have freedom. And that's an absolute essential fact that people need to recognize.
What do
People
you say
talk
to
about,
people that say, well, if you do what you're supposed to do and follow the rules, you have no reason to be fearful?
well, then guess what? You are in fear because if you don't follow the rules, something bad will happen to you. Is that freedom?
Yeah, it's
Coercion? Is
telling
that
on yourself
freedom?
and they don't even know it. Just follow the
Exactly. That
rules. It's fine.
right. We are not free. It should not, you should not have to. All right, think of registration. What is registration? You register for something. You are asking permission. Is that a right? No. The fact that you have to ask permission, otherwise you will be prohibited from doing that thing, shows that you are not free. And there are so
Mm,
many examples of that. People don't even think about it because it's been so normalized. But anyway, back to
mm.
the stories. We originally, that was not how it was, and that is not how living and free sovereign men and women should behave in the world. You do not need to ask permission to dig a hole on your property. You do not need to ask permission to travel on the road. It's your right. However, because the government that we live in now has transformed all of these rights into privileges, which is essentially against the original constitutions, and people don't really question that. They just accept it because they think this is how it's always been done, but it's really not. So how did all of these rules come into play? Well, they came into play over the years, over the last 150 something years.
Like it
Since
really sped up
it did. Well,
in
recently it sped up.
150 years. And then there's another, yeah,
Right.
it's kind of like a
And
growth spurt. This is the
yeah,
growth of corporatization very
absolutely. Well,
quickly.
and also right now, because of the we're Earth is moving through the photon belt. We are being pummeled with light codes. People's consciousness is rising organically just with all the assistance that we're getting cosmically. And so people are seeing it. And it's becoming really, really intense. And I mean, now it's really hard not to recognize that there's something very wrong. But anyway, so going back, the Civil War, think about this. Originally, you could not be a bar attorney and participate in government, because a bar attorney is someone who has sworn allegiance to the crown. And so look at everybody that you know now that's a lawyer, that is a member of the bar. They have sworn allegiance to the crown of England. That is allegiance to a foreign power. And so
Whether they think of it that way or
they
not,
don't, which many
technically
of
it
them,
is.
right, which many of them don't think of it, or they think that it doesn't matter. But I'm sorry, it does matter, because again, it's a fact, first of all, and second of all, it's an energy. There's an energy behind this. And so slowly, more and more bar attorneys were infiltrating into the government. They were not allowed to participate in the organic government, which was the men and women, but they could work for the corporation. And the corporations were formed in the townships, and also the state of state, and the DC corporation. And so all of these things are corporations, and they run, those run democratically. They don't run with the Republican form of government, which is what America's original founding government structure is all about. The Republican form of government is made up of sovereign men and women who all have equal say, and who all recognize that they must stand in honor, and they must be responsible to be the checks and balances for the entities that we have contracted to do business for us. Right. So the corporate structures were created, and they were given contract. We gave them contracts called the constitutions. There are 3 constitutions at a federal level, and each individual state has a constitution. A constitution is a compact.
And we can't keep up with all of this.
No. But anyway, so just to try to, all right, let me try to quickly, in a nutshell, explain.
Okay.
So President Lincoln was a president of the corporation. He was not connected to the organic government structure, which actually oversaw him. But he was the president of the DC corporation. Okay. He was a bar attorney, so he was prohibited from being. And this is another interesting thing. If you look at the presidential seal that sits on the podium, that hangs,
the eagle.
It's the eagle, but it's surrounded by a circle.
Okay.
Symbolically, original sheriff's badge was a star. There was no circle. The deputy had the circle, because the circle is the symbolism to show that this office reports to a higher power. And so the sheriff was the top dog with just the star, and the circle were his assistants, his deputies. So look at this presidential seal, the eagle surrounded by a circle. What
about the eagle? What does that symbolize to you?
There's a lot behind it, and I don't even have time. I don't have time to go into that, but it originated as a coat of arms. But anyway, you're
going to have to come back, eagle.
But what I want you to recognize is that it's right out there in plain sight, showing you that is the state, that is the symbol of the presidential seal, that it reports to a higher power. The original presidential seal of the unincorporated government still exists, and it does not have a circle around it. And so there is evidence everywhere that what we are looking at, that what we think is the government, is actually not the true original government. And so what ended up happening is the Civil War created chaos. That was a foreign conflict. But people got swept into it. People were fighting, and then lots of devastation happened. And so everybody at the end had to go back to their farms and try to rebuild their lives. Meanwhile, the DC corporation went crazy, running amok. And what they did, what originally happened was after the Civil War, all of a sudden there are a whole bunch of freed slaves. Suddenly now they're no longer slaves. And so all of the wealthy landowners down in the South were like, oh no, now we're going to be outnumbered when we have our assemblies. They're because they now are granted, freedom. They will outvote us. We will lose control on our counties. And so DC kindly said, well, don't worry, we'll create a special class of citizen and we'll write that into the 14th Amendment, and we will make them all citizens of the DC, which is the 10 square miles. And that was the 14th Amendment. And so what that originally was meant to do was to create a paper class of citizen that belonged to the DC corporation. So a corporate citizen. Well, guess what? That set the structure up. And so what happened is through the years, more and more rules and regulations were put into place.
And the police force. Didn't they start the police force to go and get the freed slaves, but that were supposed to come back or something like that?
Well, there was a lot of that. And
so much happened so quickly.
The thing is that the police work for the corporations. The police do not work for we the people. And
they protect property.
So many people don't realize that, and they think that the police are under a duty to protect and serve, and they are, but it's the corporation. It's not the people. And a lot of people have tried to take the police to court when they failed to show up to help them in a situation, only to find all the way up to the Supreme Court that the police are under no duty to assist the public. However, they are on duty. They are required to assist free men and women who are not 14th Amendment citizens. And so what ended up happening was in the 1930s, everything really sped up. And that was when the Great Depression happened. Now, the Great Depression was created by the banking class because they wanted problem reaction solution. They caused the problem so that people would have that, oh my God,
they'll do anything to have a job.
Oh, I'll do anything at all. And then in comes the government with the centralized system.
And don't they do that now? Still.
Well, now they're of course they are. They're doing it like crazy. But that set the stage for people being willing to accept a central bank. So the Federal Reserve became a thing. And that's a private corporation as well. That is not a part of the government. The Federal Reserve is it's just like they name something green when it's really terribly not harming the environment. It's a contradiction in terms. It's
natural flavors being okay by the FDA. Yeah, it's all around gaslighting on a
just because of the taste of because maple syrup exists in nature and it has a taste. We can use all these chemicals and salts to create the fake flavor, and people think that we can call it natural flavor because it tastes like it mimics a real thing. It's exactly what happened. And so by creating centralized processes, including the birth certificate process, people didn't know it, but what they were doing was when people applied for a birth certificate and the mother signed, she was essentially on paper abandoning her child. And so there's a recording. So the day the baby is born, that's your birth date. And then if you look at your birth certificate, about a week later, it's recorded. Well, that's when it actually goes into the record that you've abandoned your child. And so what happens is that essentially was that was the process that allowed people to get flipped from their original organic birthright status of a living man or woman on land and soil, part of the Republican form of government, into the 14th Amendment corporate citizen, which is a taxpayer. Wow. Essentially a slave. And so that's exactly what happened. The other thing too was when people applied for Social Security, because that was a carrot that was offered. Well, you were actually giving up your citizenship without realizing it when you agreed to take that from the government. And so just lots and lots of things, many different milestones along the way. And it's a big, long history.
Chipping away,
slowly, like the frog in the pot, slowly boiling until he dies and he didn't know it. Because it's such an incremental process. So that's where we are now. That's where we are now.
In part two, can we go over what you did?
Yes.
And that process.
Absolutely.
We'll do a part one and we'll do a part two.
Right. Because I want to talk about how that process was so powerful that it absolutely set my my healing work and my spiritual development on fire.
Yeah. All right. So we'll do
All right.
a part two.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Kenz.
You're welcome.
All right, hold on. We'll pause this.